You stand at the edge of the world's greatest graveyard, not marked by stone monuments or weathered headstones, but by silence itself. The Mongolian steppes roll before you like a vast ocean of grass, each blade trembling in winds that once carried the screams of dying dynasties. Here, beneath skies so immense they seem to swallow human ambition whole, an empire was born that would reshape civilization forever. But this is not the story you think you know. Close your eyes and feel the bite of 13th century air against your skin. The year is 1206, and somewhere in this wilderness, a man named Temujin has just proclaimed himself Genghis Khan, universal ruler. The ceremony is simple. White horsehair banners snapping in Arctic gusts, tribal chieftains kneeling on frozen earth, and the distant howl of wolves who sense that something fundamental has shifted in the natural order. You've heard the legends. The great Khan who conquered more territory than Alexander, Caesar, and Napoleon combined. The military genius whose horsemen swept from Korea to Hungary, creating the largest contiguous land empire in human history. But strip away the romantic veneer of historical distance, and you'll discover something far more chilling than mere conquest. Genghis Khan didn't just defeat armies. He systematically eliminated the very concept of opposition by targeting something more precious than gold, more strategic than fortresses, more devastating than any siege weapon ever forged. He weaponized families themselves. Picture this. A Khwarezmian nobleman watches Mongol riders crest the horizon like a dark tide. His first instinct isn't to count their numbers or assess their weaponry. It's to glance at his children, knowing that in the coming hours, their fate will be decided not by his sword arm or diplomatic skills, but by a carefully constructed system of terror that treats bloodlines as military targets. This was no accident of war, no heat of battle brutality. What you're about to witness was methodical, bureaucratic, and terrifyingly effective. Genghis Khan understood something that modern military strategists are only beginning to grasp. True conquest isn't achieved when you occupy territory. It's achieved when you eliminate the possibility of resistance across generations. The steppes themselves seem to remember. As you walk across this landscape, your boots crush grass that grows from soil enriched by the bones of entire family trees. Persian princes and Chinese emperors, Khwarezmian sultans and Russian boyars. Their lineages didn't simply lose battles here, they vanished from history entirely, erased with the surgical precision of a master strategist who had learned that mercy toward enemy families was the luxury of small-minded rulers. You see, Genghis Khan had experienced the alternative. Born as Temujin into a world where tribal warfare was personal, where vendettas passed from father to son like precious heirlooms, he understood that leaving enemy families intact meant leaving the seeds of future rebellion. His own childhood had been shaped by exactly this kind of cyclical violence, abandoned by allies, betrayed by blood relatives, watching his mother struggle to feed her children after his father's death. But where other leaders might have learned compassion from such suffering, Temujin learned something else entirely: systematic prevention. The statistics are staggering, though numbers can barely capture the human reality. Between 1206 and his death in 1227, Genghis Khan's armies didn't just conquer territories spanning from modern-day Korea to Eastern Europe. They didn't merely defeat the Jin dynasty of northern China, the Khwarezmid Empire, and countless smaller kingdoms. They executed a deliberate policy of what modern analysts might recognize as genealogical warfare, the strategic elimination of bloodlines that could threaten Mongol hegemony. Imagine walking through Samarkand in 1220, just months after the Mongol conquest. The silence is unnatural, not the quiet of a city at rest, but the hollow emptiness of a place where entire families have been methodically sorted, categorized, and redistributed according to their perceived threat level and utility to the empire. High-born women have been assigned to Mongol commanders as wives or concubines. Male heirs have been executed or absorbed into the Mongol military structure. Children have been separated from parents, their identities gradually dissolved into the vast machinery of imperial administration. This wasn't chaos, it was policy. Written records from Chinese and Persian chroniclers describe the bureaucratic efficiency with which conquered families were processed. Names were recorded, lineages traced, decisions made with the cold calculation of administrators managing livestock. Some families were deemed useful and absorbed, others were classified as threats and eliminated. The remainder simply disappeared into the anonymous mass of imperial subjects, their noble heritage forgotten within a single generation. You must understand, Genghis Khan wasn't a savage barbarian driven by bloodlust. He was perhaps history's most pragmatic empire builder, and he recognized that traditional conquest, taking territory while leaving local power structures intact, was ultimately futile. Why rule over resentful nobles who would spend generations plotting revenge when you could simply eliminate the possibility of noble resistance entirely? The psychological impact was as calculated as the physical destruction. When word spread that the Mongols didn't just defeat armies, but systematically destroyed the families of their enemies, resistance began to crumble before battles were even fought. Entire cities surrendered, rather than risk the annihilation of their bloodlines. Kings abandoned their thrones and fled into exile, choosing personal survival over defending kingdoms that would die with their families anyway. Standing here now, feeling the endless wind that carries no names because so many names were deliberately erased, you begin to understand the true scope of what occurred. This wasn't merely military conquest. It was genealogical engineering on a scale that wouldn't be attempted again until the genocides of the 20th century. The empire that emerged from these steps would last for centuries, stretching across continents, facilitating trade routes that connected east and west, spreading technologies and ideas that advanced human civilization. But built into its very foundations was a silence, the absence of all the voices that might have spoken against it, had they been allowed to survive. What kind of man architects such a system? The answer lies in the frozen tears of a 9-year-old boy, abandoned on the steppes with nothing but the bitter taste of betrayal burning in his throat. You need to understand that monsters aren't born. They're forged in the crucible of unthinkable suffering, and in the winter of 1171, somewhere in the windswept wilderness of Mongolia, a child named Temujin was learning lessons that would echo through the screams of future generations. His education in cruelty began not with books or tutors, but with the gnawing ache of starvation and the cold realization that family bonds could shatter like ice under pressure. Picture this moment. A young boy watches his father's allies, men who had sworn blood oaths of loyalty, loading their horses and turning their backs on his family. His father, Yasuge, lies dead, probably poisoned by Tatar enemies during what should have been a peaceful feast. The tribal confederation that once protected them dissolves overnight, leaving Temujin's mother Hoelun to somehow keep our children alive in a landscape that shows no mercy to the weak. You can almost hear the wind howling through their inadequate shelter, can almost feel the desperation clawing at a child's stomach as he realizes that the adults who promised protection have simply vanished. The Taichiud clan, who should have honored their obligations to Yasugai's family, instead make a calculated decision. Supporting a dead chief's widow and orphaned children offers no political advantage. Better to abandon them and avoid the burden. This abandonment wasn't just personal. It was systematic betrayal of the most fundamental social contracts that held steppe society together. Temujin learned, with the terrible clarity that only comes from absolute powerlessness, that loyalty was conditional, protection was temporary, and family bonds could be severed whenever they became inconvenient. But the boy refused to die quietly. Imagine following his daily struggle for survival. You watch him fishing in ice-rimmed streams with makeshift hooks, his small hands turning blue as he fights to pull protein from water that seems determined to claim his life instead. You see him digging for edible roots with fingernails cracked and bleeding, competing with his younger brothers for scraps that wouldn't satisfy a grown man for an hour. His mother Holun, once a nobleman's wife accustomed to respect and comfort, now scavenges like a wild animal, teaching her children that dignity is a luxury the starving cannot afford. The psychological transformation begins here, in these moments when a child's worldview crystallizes around one brutal truth. The strong devour the weak, and the only security lies in ensuring you never again find yourself among the vulnerable. You witness the exact moment when boyhood innocence dies. Temujin's half-brother Bektair, older and stronger, begins asserting dominance over the family's meager resources. In a world where a single fish or handful of berries might mean the difference between life and death, sharing becomes a dangerous form of weakness. The tension builds over months: small cruelties, stolen food, the gradual emergence of a hierarchy based purely on physical power. Then comes the breaking point. You can see it in Temujin's eyes as he and his full brother Kassar stalk Bektar across the frozen grassland, arrows nocked, hearts hammering with a mixture of terror and determination. This isn't a crime of passion, it's calculated elimination of a threat to survival. When their arrows find their mark, Temujin learns that violence isn't just a tool for acquiring resources, it's a method for reshaping the world according to your will. The mother's reaction tells you everything about the moral landscape they inhabit. Hoelun doesn't weep for Bektar or condemn her sons for fratricide. Instead, she recognizes the pragmatic necessity of their action, while warning them about the dangers of internal conflict. Her words carry the weight of hard-earned wisdom. You have destroyed your own family for the sake of survival. Learn from this. Unity within your circle is strength. Division is death. But the lessons in betrayal aren't finished. The Taichiud clan, perhaps hearing rumors of Temujin's growing reputation or fearing future revenge, decide to eliminate the threat entirely. You feel the shock of discovery as young Temujin wakes to find warriors surrounding their camp, weapons drawn, intentions clear. The boy who thought he had learned the worst lessons about human nature is about to discover new depths of cruelty. They capture him not as a prisoner of war, but as a future problem to be solved. The Kang, a heavy wooden collar designed to break spirits along with necks, becomes his world for months. You can almost feel the weight pressing down on his shoulders, the way the wood chafes against his skin until raw wounds become infected scabs. He's paraded from camp to camp like a trophy, a warning to other young men who might consider challenging tribal authority. But humiliation breeds something more dangerous than despair. It cultivates rage with the patience of a master craftsman. During those long nights when the Kangi makes comfortable sleep impossible, when his captors mock his family's fall from grace, when he's forced to accept scraps like a dog, Temujin's mind works with crystalline clarity. He memorizes faces, catalogues insults, and begins constructing elaborate fantasies of revenge that go far beyond simple retaliation. You witness the birth of systematic thinking in a teenage boy who has nothing left to lose. He doesn't just dream of killing his tormentors, he imagines eliminating their entire support networks, their families, their allies, their ability to ever threaten anyone again. The Kang becomes his university, teaching him that half measures in dealing with enemies are invitations to future suffering. His escape, when it finally comes, isn't the result of outside rescue or captor negligence. It's pure determination channeled through months of careful planning. You can feel his heart pounding as he slips away during a celebration, the heavy collar finally removed, freedom tasting like blood and possibility. But he doesn't simply flee. He steals horses, weapons, anything that might give him an advantage in the struggles to come. The boy who returns to his family's camp is fundamentally different from the one who was captured. You can see it in the way he carries himself, the cold calculation behind his eyes, the way he speaks about enemies and allies with the detached precision of someone who has learned to think several moves ahead. Temujin has discovered that survival isn't enough. Security requires the systematic elimination of anyone who might threaten your family's future. The lessons are complete. A child who suffered abandonment has learned that loyalty must be absolute or it becomes meaningless. A boy who experienced starvation understands that resources are finite and must be controlled completely. A young man who endured captivity knows that enemies must be destroyed root and branch, or they will return stronger. The steppes have forged their perfect predator. Now he needs prey worthy of his newfound understanding. What happens when that boy learns to smile? The smile appears 3 years later, cutting across his face like a blade as he watches an entire family burn alive in their own yurt. You're witnessing the exact moment when survival instincts transform into something far more dangerous, the birth of systematic cruelty. Temujin, now approaching 20, has learned to weaponize every lesson the steppes taught him, but it takes a single night of unthinkable violation to complete his education in the strategic value of destroying bloodlines entirely. The night begins with celebration. You can smell the fermented mare's milk on the evening air, hear the distant laughter from Temujin's wedding feast echoing across the grasslands. He has just married Borta, a young woman whose family alliance promises to strengthen his growing power base. For perhaps the first time since childhood, Temujin allows himself to believe that security might be possible, that building rather than simply surviving could become his focus. You feel the warmth of the wedding fire, see the hope flickering in Berta's eyes as she adjusts to her new role as the wife of an increasingly influential young leader. The future stretches ahead of them like an unwritten scroll, filled with possibilities for children, prosperity, and perhaps even peace. In this moment, Temujin experiences something he hasn't felt since his father's death, vulnerability born of genuine affection. Then the Merkit riders explode out of the darkness, like demons materializing from hell itself. You hear them before you see them, the thunder of hooves against frozen ground, war cries that cut through the night air like physical wounds. These aren't random raiders seeking easy plunder. This is calculated revenge, planned with the patience of predators who understand that true cruelty requires perfect timing. The Merkit clan remembers that Temujin's father once stole a bride from them, Hoelun, Temujin's own mother. Now they've come to collect payment in kind, with interest accumulated over decades of festering resentment. The attack unfolds with nightmarish efficiency. You watch Temujin's guards scattered like leaves before a hurricane, their loyalty meaningless against superior numbers and the element of surprise. Wedding guests flee into the darkness, abandoning their hosts to save themselves, another lesson in the conditional nature of human allegiance that Temujin will never forget. But the raiders aren't interested in slaughter for its own sake. They have a specific objective, and you feel your stomach clench as you realize what it is. Borta, the new bride, the symbol of Temujin's attempt to build something permanent and precious. They take her not as mere plunder, but as a deliberate message. Your happiness is an illusion, your family is a weakness, and we can destroy everything you love whenever we choose. You see Temujin's face in the firelight as his wife disappears into the night, her screams growing fainter until they're swallowed by distance and despair. The expression that crosses his features isn't simple rage or grief. It's the cold recognition of a fundamental truth about power and vulnerability. Love creates liability. Family bonds become chains that enemies can use to drag you into helplessness. The rescue, when it comes months later, reveals the man Temujin has become. You ride alongside him and his sworn brothers Jamuka and Togrul as they track the Merkit across hundreds of miles of wilderness. But this isn't a desperate dash to save a beloved wife. It's a calculated military operation designed to send a message that will echo across the steppes for generations. The Merkit camp appears in the pre-dawn darkness like a cluster of sleeping animals, unaware that death is studying them from the surrounding hills. You feel the tension in the war party as Temujin raises his hand, signaling the attack. But something in his posture tells you this won't be a simple rescue raid. This will be an education in consequences. The assault begins with fire, not the clean flame of honest warfare, but the deliberately set blazes that consume everything: yurts, supplies, horses, and the people too slow or too old to escape. You watch families scattered like startled birds, parents clutching children as they flee into darkness that offers no sanctuary. The screams create a symphony of terror that drowns out even the crackling of flames and the thundering of hooves. But Temujin's attention focuses on something more specific than general destruction. You see him pursuing individual Merkit warriors with methodical precision, cutting them down not in the heat of battle, but with the cold efficiency of a hunter culling a herd. When he finds the men who participated in Borta's capture, He doesn't simply kill them. He ensures their families watch before executing them slowly, demonstrating that violation of his household will be answered with the systematic elimination of bloodlines. The psychological moment comes when you witness him standing over a Merkit chieftain's dying son, a boy perhaps 12 years old, who poses no military threat to anyone. The child looks up with eyes that mirror Temujin's own childhood terror, pleading for mercy that will never come. In that instant, you see Temujin make a choice that will define the rest of his existence. Better to be the architect of horror than its victim. The blade falls, the bloodline ends, and something fundamental shifts in the moral universe. When Borta is finally recovered, you notice the change in her as well. She's alive, physically unharmed by Merkit standards, but carrying a child whose paternity will never be certain. Temujin accepts her return without question or recrimination, but you can see him calculating the implications. His wife has become a symbol of both his vulnerability and his ruthlessness, proof that enemies can wound him, but also evidence of what happens to those who try. The real revelation comes in the aftermath, as you watch Temujin methodically hunt down not just the raiders who participated in the attack, but their extended families, their allies, anyone who might harbor resentment or seek future revenge. This isn't the hot vengeance of an angry husband. It's the cold strategizing of a man who has learned that mercy toward enemy families is an invitation to perpetual warfare. You observe him studying the faces of captive Merkit women and children, sorting them into categories: useful, dangerous, or irrelevant. Those deemed potentially valuable are absorbed into his growing tribe, their identities gradually dissolved into his expanding power structure. Those considered threats simply disappear, vanishing into mass graves that will be forgotten within a generation. The remainder become warnings, living examples of what happens to bloodlines that cross the future Genghis Khan. Standing amid the smoldering ruins of the Merkit camp, watching families that existed for centuries reduced to scattered corpses and traumatized survivors, you witness the birth of a new kind of warfare. Traditional steppe conflicts had always involved raiding, retaliation, and eventual accommodation. But Temujin is pioneering something unprecedented: the complete elimination of generational threat through systematic genealogical destruction. The boy who once wept over his father's grave has learned to create orphans with industrial efficiency. The young man who suffered abandonment now engineers the permanent separation of families. The warrior who experienced captivity has mastered the art of ensuring his enemy's children will never grow old enough to seek revenge. As the sun rises over the destroyed camp, painting the smoke-filled sky the color of dried blood, you realize you're witnessing something historically unprecedented. This isn't just conquest. It's the methodical application of childhood trauma to the problem of empire building. How does such a man convince others to follow him into the abyss? The answer lies in the terrifying mathematics of survival. He promises absolute security to those who join him and demonstrates absolute annihilation to those who refuse. You stand witness to the most brutal political transformation in human history, watching as a traumatized orphan methodically restructures the very concept of power on the Mongolian steppes. The year is 1206, and Temujin is about to become Genghis Khan through a process that will redefine civilization itself. But this coronation won't be marked by golden crowns or sacred oils. It will be baptized in the blood of entire family trees. The unification begins with a simple proposition that cuts through centuries of tribal tradition like a sword through silk. You hear Temujin address a gathering of Mongol chieftains, his voice carrying across the assembled masses with the authority of someone who has already died and been reborn. Join me completely, and your bloodlines will endure forever. Oppose me in any measure, and your names will be forgotten before the next winter. This isn't negotiation. It's mathematical certainty presented as political choice. You watch the faces of tribal leaders as they process the implications. These are men accustomed to the fluid loyalties of steppe politics, where alliances shift with seasons and today's enemy might become tomorrow's marriage partner. But Temujin is offering something unprecedented: permanent security in exchange for absolute submission, backed by a demonstration of destructive power that makes resistance unthinkable.